Before we dive in, remember, if you think the story is dark now, wait until you hear what comes next. Hit subscribe, like the video, and drop a comment, because the deeper we go, the more twisted this case becomes. The story begins at 4:13 a.m. on a freezing November morning in the quiet town of Ravensridge, Pennsylvania, a place where the loudest sound at night was usually a dog barking or a passing freight train. But on this particular morning, the silence was shattered by a frantic 911 call from a jogger who claimed he'd found something wrong, very wrong, near an abandoned steel mill on the east side. When officers arrived, their flashlights swept across the frost-covered ground until they landed on it. A car, a silver Honda Civic, parked at an angle as if it had been abandoned in a hurry. The front door was open, the engine still warm, and the headlights were flickering weakly as though struggling to stay alive. But the most disturbing part was in the car. It was what they found 20 feet away, half submerged in the cold, muddy creek that snaked behind the old mill. A woman, early 30s, barefoot, face turned toward the pale sky. No signs of struggle around her except one thing. Her left hand was gripping a torn piece of red fabric so tightly that officers had to pry it loose. And on her wrist, a bracelet engraved with the name Clara Morton. Within minutes, floodlights and police tape surrounded the mill. Crime scene technicians moved with cold precision, but something felt off. This didn't look like a random attack. It looked staged, almost theatrical, placed in a position where someone wanted her to be found. Detective Elias Hart, a man known for solving cases that others couldn't, was called from his home before sunrise. He'd only been awake for 6 minutes when he arrived, still smelling faintly of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. He crouched beside the body and stared at Clara's lifeless face, then at the red fabric in the evidence bag. Whoever did this, he said, wanted to send a message. But to whom? Inside the car, investigators found Clara's purse, her driver's license, her phone, but no sign of forced entry, no defensive wounds, and no blood inside the vehicle. It was as if she had calmly driven herself here, stepped out into the cold, and then, what? Drowned? Collapsed? Or met someone? Her phone was the first real clue. On the lock screen, 12 missed calls from the same number, unknown caller. The call started at 2:04 a.m. and ended at 3:57 a.m., just 16 minutes before she was discovered. Hart's instincts tingled. Someone had been trying desperately to reach her in the hours before she died. Or worse, calling because they knew she wouldn't answer. When the coroner announced that there were no visible signs of trauma, it deepened the mystery. Clara wasn't beaten. She wasn't stabbed. She wasn't shot. Yet she was lying in a frozen creek in the middle of the night. Hart stepped away from the scene, rubbing his forehead. Something gnawed at him. The red fabric, torn, not cut, and her bare feet. Her shoes were missing. People don't walk barefoot into the woods in below freezing temperatures. Someone removed them. Someone placed her here. Back at headquarters, they began piecing together Clara Morton's life. She was a school counselor, recently divorced, living alone in a modest apartment downtown. No criminal history, no enemies, no known disputes. By all accounts, she was loved by her students, respected by her colleagues, and described by neighbors as quiet, gentle, didn't bother anyone. But the more they dug, the more inconsistencies appeared. Her neighbor claimed she'd heard Clara arguing with a man the night before. Clara's ex-husband insisted they hadn't spoken in weeks. Clara's best friend said Clara had been acting nervous lately, locking her doors multiple times, jumping whenever her phone buzzed. Then there was a final text message, sent at 1:52 a.m. to her sister. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. Investigators stared at the message for minutes. The timestamp placed at just 12 minutes before the unknown caller started dialing her repeatedly. And then, the most chilling discovery, Clara had left a voicemail on her therapist's phone, recorded at 1:58 a.m. Her voice whispered, cracked with fear, "He found me. I don't know how, but he found me." But who? The next morning, Detective Hart visited Clara's apartment. Everything seemed untouched. No signs of forced entry, no chaos, until Hart opened her bedroom closet. At first glance, it seemed normal. Shoes lined up neatly, clothes arranged by color, a small chest at the bottom. But inside the chest was something that stopped Hart cold. A stack of letters. Dozens of them. all signed by the same initial, Ah. Each letter was a different shade of disturbing, some affectionate, some obsessed, some angry, but all of them contained variations of the same chilling line. You belong to me. You promised, and I always collect what I'm owed. The letters were dated as far back as 7 years. Clara had kept them hidden. Not a single one had been reported. Hart scanned the final letter, dated 3 weeks before Clara's death. I know where you are now. You can't hide anymore. As Hart read the words, that cold, gnawing feeling in his stomach sharpened. Whoever R was, they weren't just a threat. They were closing in. Clara had sensed it. She'd tried to warn someone, and now she was dead. But when he lifted the false bottom of the chest, he found something even more disturbing. A single photo, printed on glossy paper. Clara was in the frame, mid-step, walking home from work. She looked tired, unaware she was being watched. The photo was taken from a distance, zoomed in, grainy. On the back, written in rushed handwriting, "Soon." Hart closed the chest slowly. This wasn't just stalking. It was a long-term psychological hunt. Someone who believed Clara was theirs. Someone patient. Someone determined. But then came the moment that changed the trajectory of the entire case. An officer entered the apartment, pale and shaken. "Detective, we just traced the unknown caller who kept ringing Clara before she died." Hart braced himself. Who was it? The officer swallowed hard. It was coming from a burner phone registered near Old Ridge Road. "We sent a unit. They found a cabin out there, burned to the ground. But in the ashes, they found something else." Hart stared at him. "Found what?" The officer handed him a charred metal item sealed in an evidence bag, a bracelet. The engraving was still visible. Clara. It was her missing second bracelet, the one she always wore, meaning whoever took it was at that cabin, recently, possibly while Clara was dying. But as Hart turned the evidence bag in his hands, something horrifying hit him. The bracelet wasn't charred on the inside, only the outside, which meant it hadn't been in the fire. Someone placed it there after the cabin burned. A message, a warning, or a signature. Hart looked at his team and said quietly, this wasn't the crime scene. This was a beginning. And then, as he stepped outside, another officer came running with a radio. "Detective Hart, you need to hear this. We just found something at the creek where Clara was discovered." Hart turned. "What is it?" The officer hesitated, breathless. A second body. Detective Elias Hart had seen dozens of crime scenes in his career, but nothing prepared him for the sight waiting beneath the steel mill's rusted beams. The floodlights cast long shadows over the water, and officers stood in a tight circle, whispering urgently. When Hart pushed through them, he froze. Another victim, a man this time, face up, early 40s, wearing a soaked button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, no visible injuries, no signs of a struggle. Just like Clara, the same eerie stillness, the same unnatural positioning, as if someone had placed him there deliberately. What made this far ways, was the object resting on his chest. A second piece of red fabric, torn, identical to the one found in Clara's hand. Hart's pulse tightened. 2 bodies, same night, same location, same signature. This was no isolated attack. This was a pattern, a message from someone who wanted to be heard. "ID?" Hart asked, kneeling beside the man. "Name's Daniel Mercer," one officer said. "Local real estate developer. Wife reported him missing at around 2:30 a.m. Hart studied Mercer's face, calm, almost peaceful. But his phone wasn't anywhere near him. His wallet was missing. His wedding ring gone. Whoever staged the scene wanted to strip him of identity, but leave just enough breadcrumbs for police to follow. Hart stood slowly, his breath fogging in the cold air. Clara and Daniel, 2 people who had no connection on paper. 2 different careers, different neighborhoods, different lives. At least, that's how it seemed. As officers lifted Daniel's body for transport, Hart spotted something glinting beneath the shallow water. He stepped in, boot sinking slightly into the mud, and pulled the object out. A small metal key. It was old, brass, worn, with a faint number scratched near the head, 117B. "What does that go to?" an officer asked. Hart stared at the key, turning it in his glove. Something locked. Something someone didn't want found. He pocketed it and stepped away. The early morning light was beginning to creep over the horizon, turning the sky slate blue. As the town slowly woke, Hart could already feel the whispers forming. Ravenwood wasn't used to blood-chilling mysteries, let alone 2 deaths in one night. Back at headquarters, exhausted officers filed in and out like ghosts. Coffee steamed on every desk. The whiteboard at the front of the room was now covered with 2 side-by-side photos, Clara Morton and Daniel Mercer. Underneath each, columns labeled Motive, Timeline, Last Contact, Unknowns. A sea of unknowns. Hart called for the lead forensic examiner. "Walk me through it again." "Both victims showed no signs of struggle," she explained. "No bruising, no fractures, no defensive wounds, no ligature marks. Body temperatures indicate they died somewhere else, likely within an hour of each other, then were transported to the mill." "Transported how?" Hart asked. "Vehicle, most likely. No drag marks. Whoever did this carried them carefully." "Carefully," Hart echoed, his voice tight, like they didn't want to damage their presentation. The examiner nodded slowly. "There's one more thing. We found faint residue on both bodies, a chemical preservative. Very unusual." Hart frowned. "Preservative? Like embalming fluid?" "No. More like a slow-acting anesthetic that can immobilize someone without leaving obvious marks. Hard to detect. We're still running tests." Hart exhaled. This wasn't rage. This wasn't spontaneous. This was calculated, calm, meticulous. He turned to the board. "I want connections. Anything. Where they shopped, where they worked, who they knew. There's something tying them together." An officer raised her hand. "We found something strange with Daniel Mercer's phone records." Hart gestured for her to continue. He received a call from the same burner number that dialed Clara repeatedly. Both victims were contacted by the same unknown party on the same night. The room fell silent. "Are we dealing with a single suspect?" someone asked quietly. Hart didn't answer. His mind was racing. If one person had lured both victims, separately, then that person was organized, intelligent, someone with a long-term plan. Before he could dig deeper, the morgue technician entered, holding a sealed envelope. "This was found inside Daniel Mercer's shirt pocket," she said. "Folded twice. Waterproof paper." Hart took the envelope, his heartbeat quickening. Inside was a small, crisp note, a single sentence typed in black ink. "You missed something." Hart stared at it. Then he checked the back. Blank. "When did you find this?" he asked. "During initial processing." It was pressed flat against his chest. Hart inhaled sharply, meaning whoever placed him in the creek wanted us to see this. Wanted the chase. Wanted the attention. A detective from across the room called out, "We got Clara's autopsy prilling." Hart turned. "She didn't drown," the detective said. "Neither did Mercer. There's no water in their lungs." Hart's stomach tightened. "So cause of death." The detective swallowed. "They think they were injected with something. A drug, but it's something we haven't seen before." There it was. Confirmation. This killer was using a method designed to avoid suspicion. A method that left victims looking untouched, their bodies arranged like art pieces. Hart reached into his coat pocket, retrieving the worn brass key. He turned it over once more. Someone left this for him. A clue. Maybe even an invitation. He needed to figure out where it belonged. A rookie officer approached timidly. "Detective, we trace that key's style and numbering. It belongs to an old storage facility in Ravenwood, one that closed down 8 years ago." Hart's pulse kicked. Storage units. Abandoned. Forgotten. Perfect for hiding anything. "Location?" he asked. "East Briar Road. Unit 117B. Hart grabbed his coat. "Get a team. We leave now." But before he reached the door, his phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. He opened it. A single photo. Dark. Grainy. Taken from a distance. It was him, Detective Elias Hart, walking into Clara Martin's apartment earlier that morning. Someone had been watching them, watching him. A second message came through. "You're getting close." Hart stared at the screen, the room spinning slightly. This killer wasn't hiding. They weren't afraid. They were orchestrating everything with deliberate precision, including the moment Hart realized he was part of the game. He shoved the phone into his pocket and headed for the door with renewed urgency. The team followed him to the parking lot, engines roaring to life. The road ahead was coated in frost, trees whipping past as they sped toward East Briar Road. The abandoned storage facility loomed ahead, a rusted chain-link fence surrounding rows of decaying units. Hart stepped out first. The air felt wrong, heavy, electric, as if the place itself held its breath. Unit 117B sat near the back, half swallowed by shadows. Hart approached slowly. The door was padlocked. He lifted the brass key with trembling fingers, slid it into the lock, and heard a soft click. The padlock fell open. He hesitated only a moment before lifting the door. It groaned upward. The team raised their flashlights, and then every beam landed on what was inside. Hart's heart stopped, because inside Unit 117B was something that rewrote the entire case. Something no one expected. Clara Morton, standing, alive. The first major breakthrough came 72 hours after the incident, just as investigators feared the trail was going cold. Detectives had spent days combing through conflicting witness statements and reviewing hours of surveillance footage with no clear suspect. Then, during a routine canvass, a local store owner reported something that immediately shifted the investigation. A black SUV had been parked behind the building around the time of the crime, its driver acting unusually tense and watching the street instead of going inside the store. The owner hadn't considered it important until he heard news of the case, but his description of the vehicle matched a partial plate already flagged by traffic cameras the same night. Detectives quickly traced the SUV to a rental company on the outskirts of town. The paperwork showed it had been rented using a prepaid card and a temporary phone number, classic red flags for an organized operation. But investigators noticed something even more promising. The rental clerk had handwritten a note on the form describing the renter as nervous, impatient, and wearing a distinctive silver wristband. Reviewing security footage from the rental office confirmed the detail, and detectives now had their first visual reference of a person potentially connected to the crime. This small lead triggered a chain reaction. A digital forensic specialist enhanced the footage, isolating the wristband's design, which matched bands typically given to attendees of a private event held that same evening at a popular downtown venue. When police cross-checked the guest list against recent rental records, one name appeared in both databases, a name tied to previous investigations but never formally charged. For the first time since the case began, investigators felt they were no longer chasing shadows. They had a direction, a person of interest, and the beginnings of a trail that hinted this story might be far bigger than anyone initially imagined.